people who vote for the Trump tax cut, to continue the tax cut and make it permanent, will be able to stand in every city and every town with a group of people behind them. And you realize that's every man and woman in their community that benefits from those lower taxes.
Welcome again to another episode of the Let People Prosper Show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows about the importance of keeping taxes low, of not raising taxes, and continuing to also fight against big spending. And it's none other than Grover Norquist. Grover, welcome to the Let People Prosper Show.
Vance, good to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on again. This is your second time now. And it's always a pleasure to have you on and talk to you in person and everything else. And, here recently I joined ATR as staff economist. So I'm excited about all the things we're going to be doing together. A lot of big stuff happening. Before we get into all that, though, let me give you a short bio for the audience and then we'll jump right into it.
Sure.
So Grover Norquist is president of Americans for Tax Reform, ATR, a taxpayer advocacy group he founded in 1985 at President Reagan's request. ATR works to limit the size and cost of government, opposing higher taxes at the federal, state, and local levels, and supports tax reform that moves towards taxing consumed income once at one rate. So important. They also organize the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which asks all federal and state office candidates to commit themselves in writing to the American people to oppose all net tax increases. If you're not already on that list and you're listening, you need to be on that list. Get with me, and then I'll get you connected with Grover. Grover holds an MBA and a BA in economics from Harvard University, and he resides in Washington, D.C. So with all that stuff going on, Grover, you've been on before, so you kind of went through what motivates you overall. What's motivating you these days to get up every day and do what you do?
Well, we have an opportunity to make some changes on the size of government, the power of government, the cost of government, and expanding liberty, both at the national level in Washington, D.C., and state by state. And those are both happening at the same time. And there are real dangers that we could delay some of the decisions we need to make, particularly on reducing taxes and regulations, as happened in 1981 when Reagan had his tax cuts, but they didn't take full effect until 1983. And so in 1983, we had 4 million new jobs, tremendous job creation with a much smaller workforce then. That was after we lost 25 seats in the House because we didn't have the growth until after the full tax cut took effect, or with Trump in 2017, when we could have had the tax cut take effect January 1st, 2017, but it didn't get done for a year. December 22nd is when Trump signed it because people delayed it. Congress delayed it. And it didn't take effect until the beginning of 2018. So in 2019, tremendous growth, 6.8% jump in the median income, family of four, pretty cool, much better than anything Obama ever saw. That was shortly after we lost 40 seats in the House because the economy hadn't grown yet. So timing matters.
Yes.
Not just policy matters, but getting it done sooner rather than later. You have to govern in such a way that you're ready to win the next election. You have to campaign in such a way you can make the claim that the campaign and your election means you take the next step and that you have popular support for that, and that people and the press understand that. When Reagan got elected, everyone knew there was a tax cut coming. When Trump got elected in 2017, everyone knew there was a tax cut coming. And this time around, he said, I want to make the tax cut permanent and go beyond to lower rates. So I think he made the case of Trump made the case of what he was going to do, and the Republicans in the House and Senate were all elected on the same platform. Nobody said, I want higher taxes or don't want to continue the tax cut. So it's what we do every day. You govern in order to get reelected, and you run a campaign to get reelected in order to govern.
Yes. What do you find are some of the hindrances right now? Like, when you're being up there in DC and talking to folks, because there's been talk about, and as Trump said, one big, beautiful bill, right? Of reconciliation and everything else. That way you can have a simple majority versus the 60 votes and all that. What's kind of holding this up? Because this seems like a no-brainer, Grover, that we should be moving forward with this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act as quickly as possible. Because as you've noted multiple times now, and I've learned from you on this, is we should be looking at current policy. Because to me, that seems like one of the things is that we're already running massive deficits. We don't want to add to the deficit. But if you look at baseline policy or the baseline sort of scenario that we're going to have major tax hikes if this doesn't go into place. And I don't know why we would want to look at that. If we are going to look at current policy for spending, why wouldn't we look at current policy for taxes, right?
We need to. One of the challenges is we have a very narrow majority in the House.
Yeah.
And any three people can decide to have a hissy fit or get focused on one thing and not the big thing. And you're stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a number of House members who aren't paying attention and don't get it. What we do need to do is what the president said, one bill. In it, you put the money you want to spend on national defense, the money you want to spend on border security. You make the changes in energy policy, which will allow us to drill for more energy and raise money from that, and the tax cuts and the spending cuts that you want into the bill. Then everybody votes for it, perhaps for different reasons. There's some people who just don't understand taxes or economic growth. Sadly, some in the Republican Party in Congress. But they want the border security, and they are not going to be having any daylight between Trump and where they are on border security. And there's a bunch of those guys in Texas.
Yeah.
And they will vote for the bill if it has border security. And then also has the pro-growth tax policies that the president wants and that the country needs. And they don't have to understand that if they don't choose not to understand it. But if you were to divide it into two and do first, they said, there's an obvious, very easy, quick bill we could do, the border security. Can we see it? Is it written down? No, you can't see it. It's not written down, but it's very easy and everyone agrees to it. Okay, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
And it's not just border security. It was supposed to be just border security. Then it was border security plus a whole bunch of money for national defense and energy.
Yeah.
Energy, because they wanted to take the money from expanding energy exploration and spend it on the wall instead of putting it into a pile for everything that you'd use it for.
Yeah. Should
you pass the first bill, there are more than three people who will wander off and announce the spending cuts aren't big enough. The tax cuts or something. And you will not pass the bill the president needs and frankly, that the House members need in order to win the next election and elect a Republican House in 2 years.
Yeah.
The people thinking along those lines are so blind. They sit in solid Republican seats. They'll win.
Yeah.
But they'll be in the minority, and then no one will pay any attention to them at all. Okay.
True.
So that said, the president has been able to sit down with people who get disgruntled, and he has a lot more patience than I would have, and explaining to somebody the way the rules are on how you pass these bills and what you can't do on them. And no, there are restrictions on how you can deal with the reconciliation package. You can't change laws. Cut taxes, yes. Cut spending, yes. Change the law, no. So the president gets it. The House leadership gets it. The Ways and Means Committee gets it completely. The Speaker of the House gets it. The Senate leader for the relevant committee gets it completely. The Finance Committee. So I think, and the president understands he's only president for 2 years if he loses the House. And he can't have 3 or 4 members in the House who don't understand what they're doing push him into traffic.
Yeah.
And because they'll be okay. I'll be a congressman. I'm in a Republican district, even if everything goes wrong. And the president will still be president, yes, without any ability to do anything. So if you want to know why the president's going to be really angry at you for dividing it into 2 bills, and the second one, the one that will get him reelected, can't pass. Anyway, that's the politics of it. Good news is the other, as you said, you go with present policy. Right now, to make present policy permanent, That doesn't cost anything because most of the tax cuts are still in place. There are a few tax cuts. The expensing has been downgraded a little bit. We need to do something there. But if you do present law is that all the tax cuts except corporate income tax disappear in a year or so. And then to repass it would take $5 trillion over the next decade. And then you have to go get pay-fors, which are tax increases. So the people who talk about let's do present policy are really saying let's have massive tax increases. And that's crazy. And it would destroy the Trump presidency. And so I don't think that will happen. It is what the House passed. The House Budget Committee passed a bill which does that. Why do we go, that's okay? Because the Senate says we'll pay no attention to what the House did. Their number doesn't matter. We will do what the president wanted, what makes sense, which is present policy, not present law. And we will make the tax cuts permanent. Can you imagine how good it'll be for the stock market and for economic growth and for every businessman and woman, small business, big business, self-employed person to have certainty for not the next 10 years,
right,
but 20 or 30 or 40 years when you're deciding whether to open a new factory or not.
Yeah. No, the uncertainty is huge. I mean, that's a huge hit to expectations for the future, profitability. Yeah. So it stifles the innovation and the investment that would happen today. Yeah. And so that's a huge thing. And I think too, Grover, is that there's also a need for the certainty for the economic growth that the country has been, there's been a huge hit over the last 4 years under the Biden administration. We had nearly $2 trillion in new regulations. That's a hidden tax on all of us. That's hurting us today. There was massive deficits in debt that have been added and interest rates higher than otherwise. Inflation reached a 40-year high, and they still haven't caught up. There's, real wages are still down about 2% since Biden took office. And this is why we had the election that we did. An election has consequences. and oftentimes what I hope are pro-growth policies that will put us on a better path forward. And so while I get the issue with the spending, and you and I share this is why we've been working on the Sustainable Budget Project and really trying to force the federal level and state and local governments as well. We'll talk about that to rein in spending. We need both, right? You and I have been working on this for a while, where you need growth and you need spending restraint. And if we don't have those things, and then the growth comes with lower taxes, lower regulations, and all the stuff the president's talking about, we can't get to a balanced budget. We can't get to any of these other places, right, that people want. If you
want to balance the budget, if you want to reduce the deficit, the most important thing you can have is economic growth. Mm-hmm. If we grow at 4% a year instead of 2% a year over a decade, that takes the deficit down by $7 to $8 trillion, because you have more growth and fewer people on welfare and getting paid for not working. That's a very important number, $8 trillion a year. You can, in a matter of decades, take the deficit down and the debt down towards zero through growth.
Yeah.
The important thing is to grow the economy and for two reasons. One, to get reelected, so you can be back and have another bite at the apple. Okay. If you don't do that, you lose control and you have 4 years like Biden, and the debt goes up and the deficit goes up. So those people who don't understand growth are determined to push us down the direction of Argentina, where you don't get growth, you just get more debt.
Yeah, exactly.
In the past, not the new Argentina.
Right. I was about to say, Javier Milei has changed all that now. Yeah. Did you hear recently the latest number I heard on inflation? Because they were running, 100% inflation a month or something. It's down to 2.2%. It's been remarkable what he's been able to do of cutting regulations, cutting the budget, and tax reforms and other things that are going on. And I think that Trump's learns that as well, right? Trump always is competitive with other countries, and especially if Argentina is going in that direction, I think that's forcing him to be even more fiscally conservative than he otherwise would have been.
Well, it certainly shows that it works, and you can both restrain spending and keep taxes down and have economic growth, and it makes everything better off. And it's one of the things that helps bring inflation down.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think another thing too will be the deregulation underneath the Trump administration, which some of that's already started. Some of it will take a couple months to really start to feel. But I'm excited, Grover, about the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, with Elon Musk and the things that they're highlighting. It'll be interesting to see what the teeth are, if they're able to actually bring down a lot of this. But I think it's a couple things that I'd love to get your thoughts on. One is a lot of the contracts. They're already terminating contracts, which means lower spending for the future. And there's an idea of at least they're exposing a lot of this ridiculous spending that's going on in D.C. that will give Trump, I think, more ammunition to go after Congress and say, look, we've got to start cutting this budget now. And here are some key ways to do it. And I know Russ Vought, who I worked with at OMB, is a fiscal hawk. And so I'm hopeful that we could really see some major, not only get the tax cuts in place and extend those and make those permanent, but also really focus on the spending side. Are you feeling that way as well?
Yes, and for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
What Elon Musk and his teams are doing really discredits the entire left, okay? Not just the Democrat congressman and president who passed all these new laws and the Democratic President Biden and Obama that had these massive increases in regulation. But when you look into it and see how they didn't take any care to avoid waste, fraud, abuse, checks going to people who shouldn't have gotten checks. There was no effort to even police the little stuff. As they go through some of the things they find in millions of here, and that's only $10 million. Well, some people work all their lives and they won't pay $10 million in taxes in their entire life. And that was all wasted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe everybody in their neighborhood's taxes together were wasted with that one stupid project. It just shows the contempt that the establishment has in Washington, D.C. for other people's money. But it also says something devastating about the Washington Post and the New York Times and public television. Why is this stuff that Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency are finding out? Why wasn't the Washington Post writing exposés about this?
Yeah.
Why were the bureaucrats that we're supposed to trust not fixing these things? This was all something that could have been fixed if the bureaucrats, who weren't elected to anything, had taken people's livelihood, which they take in taxes, and treated it seriously. So I think that this town will be discredited and that the press that covers this town, Washington, D.C., is and will be continued discredited, which makes the next step of reducing the size and scope of government easier to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. And one thing that I've been trying to say more, Grover, is spend less, prosper more. Because my whole let people prosper thing that I do, and I'm trying to get that sort of mantra down. Spend less, prosper more. But of course, that will come with lower taxes as well, and deregulation and all this great stuff that we're talking about. And one of the things that I've been excited to work with you on, and for a couple of years now, is the sustainable budget, which basically is to say the budgets at the state and local level, even the federal level, should grow by no more than population growth plus inflation as a maximum. It's not a target. It's probably too high, especially during the Biden years and this inflation. But at least it puts a regulator, like on your car, of how fast you can grow. We'd love for it to be less than that, of course. And what I've seen now is that the research that we've done, and we're updating this over the next month with the latest data that I'm working on now, is there have been 12 states that have been within population growth plus inflation, either all funds, the total budget, or just the state funds. And so there is momentum moving in this direction. And one of the things I hope that the federal government will learn from is from the states and our system of federalism. But I wonder what you're hearing as you go across the country and you talk to so many people. What are they feeling about the spending side of things? And could our sustainable budget really catch on?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
And about 13 years ago, Americans for Tax Reform began to work at the state level to get states to commit, as a governor, state legislative leaders, to phasing the state personal income taxes to zero. The first state to do this competently There are some false starts. People who just will take the income tax and drop it on top of the sales tax and increase the sales tax. What good does that do?
Yeah.
The same amount of money is coming out of the same pockets. You just from a different pocket somehow, but same person.
Yeah.
To where we started to say in North Carolina, very slowly, cautiously, we're going to spend this much, which gets the sustainable budget. You get a sustainable budget. And when revenue comes above that line, you might take some of it and spend it on a road or something, but you're already funding everything you need to fund. But most of it, you permanently reduce the income tax. So they've had income tax rates coming down each year in North Carolina for about 12 years now.
Yeah.
And they're on the way to zero. They've also decided to take their corporate income tax to zero.
Yeah.
And they've been able to do this while, spending does go up a little bit, not as fast as it would have otherwise, but the revenue comes in through growth, not through higher taxes. There are now 12 states where the governor in both houses have not only said it is our policy, we're going to zero, but they've taken concrete steps to do it, actually passed laws to click all the way down to zero. Louisiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, where they've done it year after year in Iowa,
Yep.
now in Arkansas, Arizona's at 2.5. And they're actually, I said 12 because that's the last time we did the map. There are now two more as of 2 weeks. Missouri, the Republican governor in his State of the State, we're going to zero. And they introduced legislation in both bodies. Then you have the state of South Carolina, which announced we're going to go from over 6% down to 3.5%, and then phase down to zero from there. And of course, Kansas now is phasing down to 4% from 6% over the objections and the veto of the Democratic governor, because they have Republican majorities in both houses. So there are now about 15 that are on their way towards zero. And 14 of them have said, our goal is definitely zero. We're getting all the way to zero. That makes all the difference in the world because people can plan. And we talk about people moving from high tax states, California, New York, to Texas and Florida, two of the 8 states without an income tax now. But before people move, their money moves.
Yeah.
Their investments go into building jobs and opportunities in red states with low taxes. Then the people move. And maybe even between that, the children move. As soon as they graduate from college, they move to where the jobs are.
Yes.
And parents may move down as well. So there's a lot of movement in. So we have lower taxes, people are moving into those states. And one of the things that makes it possible is that they basically, in effect, put a cap on spending, revenue comes above. So sustainable budgets and phasing the income tax to zero go together.
Yeah.
And when 12 states can say, look, we did this for 10 years, then the other 40 states, they can't be done. Mm-hmm. Well, but it can.
Yes.
It has been. Look over here.
Yeah.
And so, you have to have a 14% income tax, says California, 11% income tax, says New York. No, you don't.
No,
you don't. And that competition is not just on taxes. We want to make it on spending as well, because that allows you to take tax rates down. School choice.
Yeah.
We now have more than 10 states that have gone to full school choice education savings accounts. Texas, any moment now,
right,
will be added to that list. So each of these states give you a lot of competition for better government. And then, you know what? Someday, because we'll have flat rate, the 23 states have a single rate tax. Within the next 2 years, we will have more than a majority of the states, more than 25 states.
Wow.
Get a single rate tax. That's the point at which half of the Senate represents a state that has a single rate tax. We can now talk about a flat rate tax in the national level. And I think shortly in the next several years, we'll be able to talk about why don't we in Washington, the federal government, have a sustainable budget that grows no faster than people's income does, that it becomes a smaller part of their budget in their own personal budget each year, because we have not 10 or 12 states doing that, but now 20 or 25. Good ideas at the state level can go to Washington. Yeah, and we saw that with welfare reform back in the 90s as it was spreading across. I think Utah started some things and other states did before the 1996 welfare reforms happened. I mean, this is the kind of model that we need to keep using. And so I think you're exactly right, Grover, about the cost of the income tax is just so high. I mean, we're seeing the direct effects of this. As you know, I live in Texas, and so we're seeing on average, the comptroller, Glenn Hager, just updated this. We're seeing an average of 1,600 new people in Texas every day right now. 1,600. And so, yes, that creates some challenges with housing and some other things that are going on, but it also shows just the benefit of how people move with their feet. Incentives matter, economics, all this goes into play. And so the lower that you can keep those income taxes, the more that people want to work, save and invest and grow an economy. And if you're having income taxes, you are disincentivizing all of that. And that's why we're seeing so many people, I think, flooding into places like Texas. And last year, you're right, Louisiana, who I worked some with the Pelican Institute on their reforms there that they did with Governor Jeff Landry. One of the things they talked a lot about was the brain drain, because they're one of the only states in the South that had a net loss of people leaving Louisiana. And you look around, you got Texas and Florida and Tennessee and other states without an income tax and other ones having lower income taxes. And it's no wonder that those college students who, by the way, you don't have to necessarily pay for in Louisiana. It's provided for you through taxes and everything. A lot of people would go to school there, but then they would leave. They would go to Texas and other places. And so I think this is going to be very important. And what I'm continuing to drive home the message of our sustainable budgeting is that you've got to keep spending in check. And using that surplus buy down method will really help to weed out that. I wonder, what do you say to some of those states like Texas, who doesn't have an income tax, and yet they're still running surpluses? The surplus right now that the legislature has is about $24 billion. There's $28 billion in the rainy day fund in Texas. What do you suggest that they do with that money? I know that you and I have talked about different ways, but what is your main focus that you would have the Texas legislature do? Texas needs to understand that, like the tortoise and the hare story, they're the hare out front. And they go, we don't have an income tax. Aren't we cool? You know, there are 7 other states without an income tax, and there are 12 en route to be no income tax. You are not going to be special in a few years, okay, if you don't keep moving, okay? Now, the tortoise may be behind you, but if you don't keep running, you don't stay ahead. And the day will come, if Texas does nothing, where people leave Texas and move to other states that have gotten rid of not just their income tax, but their corporate income tax and limits on property taxes. Yeah. One of the challenges Texas and other states have is the states can be fairly fiscally responsible, but there are blue cities inside that state who spend like crazy, who have votes on not on November elections, but in August or April to bond. And to bond is to borrow a bunch of money. And then you have to raise taxes to pay for the bonding. And then you raise all these property taxes. And then the Democratic mayor goes, oh, my goodness, the state should give me money so I don't have to raise the property taxes again because I'm spending and bankrupting this town. And then when the state is foolish enough to do that, as Texas has been, as Ohio has been, as some other states have been, what you do is you subsidize failure at the local level. People don't keep their spending down. And then the Republican state legislature is now responsible. They're the co-owner of the overspending indebtedness of Houston and Dallas and Austin. Why in the world should honest people in other cities and so on be paying extra money at the state level to subsidize Austin's spending sprees and overpayment of government employees? So limit what cities can tax. What they do is they have a 3% limit in our friends in Florida, so that the actual tax on your property can't go up more than 3%. Make it difficult to raise local taxes, and then put a cap on what a city can increase spending in any given year, so that it's sustainable.
Yes.
And every city should only be able to spend what they steal, not what somebody else steals. Okay.
Yeah.
You want it, you steal it. You face the voters and tell them, I think it's important that I have a fancy car as mayor. I'm going to raise your taxes. Well, maybe you don't get reelected then.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think the spending limit part is huge about this, too. It's often missed by a lot of think tanks and others across the state and legislators. I think that's one of the important things about Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights is that when they put that in place in 1992, it covers state funds, the state budget, and local spending as well. So even as they went from red to purple to blue, it's kept their spending pretty much in check compared to many other places across the country. Texas does have, for cities and counties, there's a levy limit of 3.5%. I think that should be lower, like Florida's 3% or even lower than that. The governor, one of his emergency items on property tax relief is to make all the bond elections in November on a uniform election date, which will be huge. So I think that there are some things moving in the right direction. One of the things that you and I've talked about over the years is how, Texas has been using the surplus money to buy down the school M&O portion, the maintenance and operation portion of the property tax. And, last session they used $12.7 billion. They came out saying this is the largest tax relief in Texas history. And the lieutenant governor said in the universe that it was the largest tax relief. But what's interesting, to your point, Grover, is that, yes, school M&O property taxes went down about $4.5 billion in 2023 when all this stuff went through. But the cities, counties, and special purpose districts all jacked up their taxes. And so overall taxes went up $700 million across the state. So there's got to be better restrictions. And I think that goes with the sustainable budgeting at the local level, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I really would urge everyone, don't have the state give money to the cities because it just allows them to spend more money. They will hide what they're spending other places. If a politician is responsible both for what he taxes and spends, then he can face the voters and say, I took this much and I spent it this way.
Yeah.
What do you think? And if they take a little and spend it wisely, they get reelected. If they take too much and spend it unwisely, they don't. But if they can go, oh, it's all the state legislature's fault because they forgot to give us the money, then I would have cut your property taxes. All of a sudden, the person responsible for looting you and your family isn't responsible. Yeah. Somebody else is responsible. Huge, huge problem.
Yeah.
Look, as we get ready to do this federal tax cut, imagine how everybody who votes with Trump's tax cut can say, look, stand there and have with somebody who's a local manufacturer and say, this has faster depreciation, expensing. It has a lower corporate rate, so I can save more money and pay people more for the job. You go to the family that says, I have the higher per child tax credit and the bigger standard deduction for my family. The guy with the gig economy or as a side hustle who's an independent contractor explains how the lower personal income tax rate is their, in effect, corporate rate because they're their own boss.
Yeah.
I'm an independent contractor. I work for me. And each of these different efforts, somebody from the barbershop who owns the barbershop and the person who works in the barbershop as an independent contractor, all of them see their taxes reduced. And who's going to fight against that? I think that people who vote for the Trump tax cut to continue the tax cut and make it permanent will be able to stand in every city and every town with a group of people behind them. And you realize that's every man and woman in their community that benefits from those lower taxes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As we're starting to wrap up here, Grover, what are your thoughts on? And hopefully this doesn't become part of the debate right now. And I mean, we've seen this going on, but the idea of free trade, protectionism, tariffs. I mean, it's a lot of discussion that's going on. There's a lot of uncertainty that it can bring about. And as we talked about earlier, businesses don't like uncertainty. But what are your thoughts on this approach that's going on out there?
We want to be competitive with China. We want to be competitive with Europe. We right now have a corporate income tax of 21%, national, federal, and about 4.3% state average, 25%, over 25%. That's higher than China's.
Yeah.
That's higher than the average European. Why would we whine about other people having tariffs when we do that much damage to our own manufacturers?
Amen.
How about we take the corporate rate down to 15%, which when you added the state one, now you're under China. Now you're lower than the European average, not higher than the European average. We're not competitive sometimes because our politicians shoot our workers and consumers and businessmen and women in the foot. Okay? So stop that. Then you mentioned the $2 trillion in new regulations. We need to undo all of the regulations out of the Biden year, all of the ones that came out of the Obama year. We were doing fine before any of those went in. That is trillions of dollars. Rather than say to people, if you want to sell stuff to us, we're going to have a higher tax so that everything Americans buy is more expensive. When you have a tariff, you raise the prices that people in America pay. Those higher prices are paid not by Chinese people, not by French people, not by guys from Switzerland or some other country we can't pronounce, okay? They're paid by Americans. All the casualties in a trade war are hit by friendly fire. American tariffs hurt Americans. Chinese tariffs hurt Chinese people. Swiss tariffs hurt Swiss people. So every government's responsible for the damage to their own country. We can reverse that, and the president's shown us how. Take the corporate rate from 35 to 21. Much more competitive. Not enough, but much better than where we were. The president wanted to get rid of 2 regulations for every one that we put in. Now he says it's 10 to 1. What he needs to say is the cost needs to be 10 times higher, because you can have lots of little regulations that you're getting rid of and bringing in one big one and not really be making progress. I know what he means by 10 to 1, but he needs to add cost, not just numbers. Cost down 10 to 1. And then you look around, you go, we don't need tariffs then. We outcompete the rest of the world. We're sprinting past them. I understand how he wants to get Mexico to behave and do what we want, so he threatens tariffs. But they're like nuclear weapons, okay? Threatening with them, pretty cool if everybody does what you want. If you ever have to use them, not so fun.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think that we're pointing the fingers at other people, and we've got 3 more pointing back at us. We've got to figure out a way to reduce our own cost of doing business here in America for profitability instead of raising taxes on Americans to somehow affect another country. And by the way, the Communist Party in China doesn't really care about their people. They don't have to be reelected. So even if it did slow down their production in some way, they're not going to change their trade habits. And most of these countries aren't either. And so I remember having some interesting discussions with Peter Navarro and Lighthizer when I was at the White House and trying to go and change their minds. But they're pretty stuck on it. And I think that they're going to keep pushing it. And even when I was at OMB, Grover, when we would do our analysis, our big macro modeling, we would tell the president, look, this is a drag on growth. But I think what their idea is that, well, it's worth it over time. We had this 0 policy longer term. This was going to get rid of tariffs and allow for free trade. I just don't see that those steps are going to happen.
Well, everything that advocates of tariffs say would help us, okay, can be done by reducing regulatory burdens, reducing taxes here in America. That makes us outcompete China. That makes us outcompete Europe. It makes us outcompete Canada and Mexico and everybody else. And we are in complete control of that. When we put up tariffs, so do our competitors. They put up tariffs too. So it's not win-lose, it's lose-lose. And so this is a real, and by the way, Trump's policies on taxes and regulations do everything that you might hope that tariffs could do, but they've not done them in the past. We know that lower taxes work. We know that less regulation works. We know that right to work and labor laws that protect workers, not union bosses, that's very important. And again, there are 27 right to work states now. So we have more right to work states. We have more school choice states. We have more no income tax states, more single rate tax, more states looking to phase out their corporate income tax. real progress here. We can outcompete the world completely with all of the ideas that the Trump administration brought in 8 years ago and that they're back with now on lower taxes, less regulations, speeding up permitting.
Yeah. Huge. And then they get in sustainable budgeting, less spending. I mean, we're to the races now. We've got an economic juggernaut on our hands. Grover, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing on continuing to fight this good fight for liberty and freedom and allowing for us to have less government in our lives. Let's keep doing it together as we will. And but God bless you and your family. And I look forward to having you on again soon.
Vance, thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Well, for the audience, thank y'all for joining us today. Go out and share this with your friends and family. They too need to know about sustainable budgeting and lower taxes and all the economic prosperity that we can have by getting government out of the way. Remember, you can find all this information and more at vanceginn.com, and go to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com to get even more information and all the show notes. So until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.